welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are going to be going over the last 2 months for reading wrap-up. I didn't film one, well technically, I filmed a reading wrap-up for September, but the issue was when I went to go and check the data, the file, it was gone. It just ate it. I don't know where it went. So we are covering both September and October because I was a little frustrated. For the last 2 months, I have read a total of 36 books. So this is probably going to be a longer one. I apologize. Or maybe if you like long videos, you might be in for a treat. So we're going to talk about it. Everything that I read. First up, we're going to go over the reading stats. In September, I read 20 total books. And in October, I read 16. I was going through a little bit of a reading slump. I know you're going to hear those numbers. You're going to think it's not the case. However, I think once you see what exactly those books were, it's going to be a little bit more apparent. Back to the statistics. The total pages read for September was 4,784 pages, whereas in October, despite reading less pages, or reading less books, I ended up reading more pages. It came out to 4,983. 6 of the books that I read in September were nonfiction, and 4 in October were nonfiction. 14 of the 20 books that I read in September were fiction, and 12 in October were fiction. I don't know why I said it like that. Whatever. That way you have some idea, at least of the statistics, the demographics of the books that I read. When we get into genres of the books, I think is where it gets a little bit more interesting. My top 5 genres in September were horror, fantasy, romance, children's, and sci-fi. But in October, my top 5 genres were romance, sci-fi, horror, queer, and manga. Anyways, I'm just going to get straight into it. I'm probably not going to dwell on too many of these books in great detail. Some of these books got covered over on the podcast that I co-host on, Literary Liberation. So if you want my thoughts on them, I'll make sure to mention which ones are or have gotten a review, so you can check those out. And if any of these you want a longer review on or a discussion, maybe that would be better suited in a podcast setting, let me know, and we can definitely manage that, or at least I can try to do it on TikTok or on here. I'm going to do this very similar to the way I did my August wrap up, so each of these books is going to get a yes, no, or maybe. I'm not going to separate out the sections for nonfiction or fiction, so you can just check in the bio. I will have them all time-stamped with the title of each book, so you can pick and choose what books you want to listen to if you don't want to listen to the whole or watch the whole video. Let's get into it. There's a lot. First on the list is Hitched, which is the first book in the Ride or Die romances by Lauren Biel. If you don't know that name, or maybe you do and it sounds familiar, she recently got in a little bit of a controversy for using generative AI for doing some ads or something. So I think it's kind of indicative of the content of the books, because this is the second book that I've read by her and neither of them have been good. I gave this one a 1-star review. I mean, it was technically a book, and it is certainly something I never wish to experience again. I was just very frustrated with both of the characters. Neither of them are likable, and they're not unlikable in a way that is entertaining. It was just like watching the worst train wreck ever. This is like the epitome of dark romance novels, and I don't ever want to experience them again. I don't know if I'll ever read the rest of these unless it's for the podcast, because there might be some relevant discussion to be had. Change of pace. I read a children's novel that I had never read before from the 1970s or 1980s called In a Dark, Dark Room and Other Scary Stories by Alvin Swartz. I ended up giving it a 4-star review. I would recommend it. I think it is great. It was such a nice, fun time. I didn't know this is where the Green Ribbon story had come from. I'm a very big fan of the Scary Stories books, so when I had seen this, I originally bought it for my kids to read. They didn't ever pick it up, so I got the opportunity to read it because we did a mini episode on this for the podcast for our Halloween mini series, and it was just really fun to read, and I'm excited that next year I'll be able to share these stories with my children, because I just think they're very timeless. They're just good, hearty folk horror stories for kids that are very unsettling in the best possible way, so I would recommend it. The first nonfiction book that I finished in September was If You Can't Take the Heat, Tales of Food, Feminism, and Fury by Geraldine DeRuiter. Hopefully I said that right. I ended up giving this a 3-star review. This it's a combination of like memoir and talking about like feminist ideas, but through the context of different meals or food that is being prepared. So I thought that aspect was really interesting. The only thing that was really kind of off-putting about it was the politics, because there was some anti-communist sentiment throughout this, and I just was not on board. It's not like an objectively bad book. It is entertaining for a nonfiction book, but for a feminist novel, it was not my favorite. Now moving back to the or like children, it's not quite. It's like a middle-aged book. Is a Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. I gave this 5 stars. I cannot recommend this book enough. I ended up reading this and finishing it before I went to work, which I think was the worst possible thing to do because it left me emotionally gutted. This is everything I could want and need in a book that uses magical realism. There is artwork inside of this novel that is just stunning, brilliant. It really just adds to the story. I cannot recommend this book enough. It deals with themes of grief and just is executed perfectly. I cannot recommend this enough. Yes, a million times yes. If you were to take anything away, I think this is going to be like one of the top books that I ended up reading over the last 2 months. Now, Bunnicula by Deborah and James Howe, I gave a 3-star. I think it's kind of dated. There is use of the G slur in this, but this also came out in like the 70s or 80s, so you have to take that into consideration. I just don't think it aged very well. I remember seeing this in the bookshelves at the library when I was a kid growing up, and I never wanted to read it, and then we ended up reading it for the podcast because we did a Halloween mini episode on it, and it kind of just landed flat. Like, it's cute. We love anthropomorphic animals. But it's just too dated. I don't think it's going to age well, and I think it's going to be one of those books that just doesn't end up keeping young people's attention. It probably won't be in libraries. It's going to be like a thing of the past. I don't think it's going to last. I read Bunny by Mona Awad. I can never pronounce your name right. I think it's Mona Awad. I gave it a 3-star review. I was very disappointed in this novel. I think it's funny that we ended up reading Bunny books back to back for the podcast, because again, we ended up reviewing this on the podcast in September. This was a book that has been pitched to me and Kristen several times as being like the weird girl lit fic. This is like an unhinged woman book, and I can get on board with that. However, the execution kind of just ended up feeling like, I think the reason that people like this is maybe they're neurotypical or they don't suffer from any sort of like mental illness, so it's more of like a caricature, and they're just like, oh, she's so strange. So it's just, I don't know, it wasn't for me. I didn't hate it, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it unless you're just curious to understand the hype around it. I think it's kind of like a hit or miss. Like, either you end up really liking it or you don't, and I'm kind of in the middle because I can see the allure of it, but the overall delivery kind of just fell flat for me. So after I read some of these books, I decided I needed to go back to my roots. So I read Submitting to the Alien Barbarian by Petra Palerno. If you don't know, she also has written the Bubble Babes novels. I am all for an alien smutty erotica novel. I gave this a 4-star. It's very short. It's very to the point. The premise of this book, of a bunch of women who kind of like sign up to be ravished, and then you know what, I don't know what I can get away with saying. It's an erotica. I will say that there's not a lot of plot happening, and that was okay because it got me through what I needed to. It's only like 84 pages, and it's just a good hearty and alien smut book. I like it, Petra Palerno's writing style as well. I think it's really entertaining. These novels, though, are not like objectively good, but they are very fun. Later on in September, I ended up getting into more horror novels, so I picked up a slasher novel called Night Shoot by David Sodergren. I rated it 5 stars. I thought it was so fun. This book is all about the misogyny in movies, and it's done through the lens of like these college-age kids. The main character is a queer woman who end up going to this family member's house to do this night shoot of this horror film, and it ends up turning into a bloodbath. It is like such a good slasher. I love a slasher horror novel. It does have elements of like extreme horror, so if you're not into that, maybe don't pick it up. But I really liked it. I thought it was great, and this was one of the first books by David Sodergren I've read so far, and I really, really liked it. I will be reading a lot more of his novels in the future. I finally got to finish The 100-Year War on Palestine by Rashid Khalidi. It is a 5-star book for me. It is very informative. I think it gives a really robust history of what policies took place over the last 100 years. I think this book came out in like 2017 or 2018. So up until that point, that talk about how the material conditions have arisen for Israel and their expansionism and their genocide of the Palestinian people. It talks about the different, the Nakbas. It's a essential read in my opinion, and I think it's a pretty solid introduction to Palestinian history. If you are somebody that's not familiar, I think this is a really good starting point. I think this couples really well with 10 minutes. This book, I'm gonna put it on the screen. It's just a really good book to have in your arsenal, especially everything that's happening in the world right now. So you can't go wrong with it, I don't think. Stuff Your Kindle Day also happened in September, and I try to take advantage of it whenever I can. Sometimes I read through some of the books. But one of the books that I did pick up was The Deal with a Demon, which was the Monster Deals or something. It's the first book by Ami Wright. I would not recommend this book. I ended up giving it a 3-star. It's about basically people who sign up to be sex workers for monsters and demons and creatures, which is fine, I guess. Like, the premise of it is kind of strange, but the demon that the main female character gets signed up with needs to eat Kitty, wink, in order to sustain his existence. It was fine. I didn't end up liking it. I did think it was ironic that they made the demon the bourgeoisie in this, but other than that, it kind of just lackluster. It didn't hit the way I wanted a monster romance to hit, and I should have used this as a red flag, because then almost right after this, I ended up reading another one. Ruby Dixon dropped her newest installation of the Reestiverse. It's the 14th novella in this series, called When She's Handy. I gave it a 3-star. I don't use like an objective rating system when I talk about my alien or monster romance. Like, they have their own ratings, and I think it kind of makes sense if you read those types of books. Like, they just kind of exist in their own world, and I treat them a little bit differently than like traditionally published novels. It's a very sweet novella. I think if you've read some of the Reestiverse novels, you'll end up liking this one as well. It's cute. I like the banter and the relationship that builds between the two characters. It's very nice. The Radium Girls, The Radium Girls, The Dark Story of America's Shining Women by Kate Moore. This is a 5-star book. Inject this into my veins. I think about this book on the regular. This is like a book I would recommend to people who are just getting into like left-wing politics, and they kind of want to understand how the economic ruling class is exploitative. I think this is a really solid jumping in point, because this takes place around the same time as the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, but in a different part of the country. One of the plants is in a different part of the country, but it also talks about the one in New York, and it just talks about how anti-worker the judicial system is, and also the economic ruling class, the links that they will go to justify the treatment of their workers, even though they are literally dying because of the practices that they have in place. It was a very incredible and insightful book. I love the way it's constructed, and it's told from the victim's perspective, so there was a lot of thought and heart put into this. It is a longer novel, but I don't think you can go wrong. If you like true crime, though, I do think you'd like this, because this is criminal and heinous. Unshrinking by Kate Manne. I gave this a 5-star rating. I think this is such a good addition to Sabrina Strings's Fearing the Black Body. If you've read that, you know that like it's such a good comprehensive understanding of the origins of the origins of fat phobia, its connection to colonialism, white supremacy, and how it is played into like the development of beauty standards. So Unshrinking doesn't try to what Unshrinking does, in my opinion, is built on a lot of that foundation that was already laid, and has a more philosophical approach to understanding fat phobia in our modern day society. It's really great. If you're not somebody that's super into philosophy, the way that Kate Manne talks and explains things is so interesting. She also wrote one of my favorite books, which is Down Girl, The Logic of Misogyny. Which is like a 10 out of 10. Unshrinking is going to be one of those books that I am constantly recommending people to read, because there's just so much stuff, and it just complements. It's an essential read. If you are somebody who is a feminist, anti-capitalist, you are anti-racist, you absolutely have to read and learn about fat phobia, and I think this is just such a excellent novel. Beautifully written. Now, completely different change of pace. I read Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, the very first one by Alvin Swartz. I gave it a 4-star. I love these books. When I was a kid, I thought they were so scary, and I do still think that a lot of them hold a lot. This could just be the nostalgia, but just folk horror in general, I feel very, I don't know, in tune to. It's like one of my favorite styles of horror and storytelling. I just think it's so interesting how you can have like social commentary and critiques from folk horror, folk stories. It's just good. Like, next Halloween, I know this is coming out in November, so it's almost Christmas time, but if you've never read these with your kids or anything, I highly recommend them. I know there has been some controversy about some of the Alvin Swartz stories, which I think have been redacted or fixed so that they are not racist. I know I read the Wendigo, and that one was questionable, so just make sure you go into it knowing your shit and you're not just blindly reading them with your kids. So this is where we get into Given, the second monster deals, Given to the Gargoyle by Ami Wright. This was a 1-star. I hated this book so much. I could not try to de-influence you from reading these. Not that they have ever gotten any traction on Book Talk, but I thought the first one was like, okay, it was fine. So I would give the second one an opportunity to see if it kind of has the same themes, or maybe like the author grows a little bit. And it was not. It was messy. The decisions that the characters made didn't make any sense to me, and I didn't end up liking either of them. It's just like, it's not good. It's not good. I don't know what I hope for. Just don't read them. The Haar by David Sodergren. I read this for the podcast. We do have a review of this up on Literary Liberation. I gave it a 4-star book. I think it is such an interesting horror novel because it is a monster horror novel, and it's a pretty true, I would say, like, monster novel. It's like The Blob, but it's also offering this criticism of a little Scottish town that has gotten bought up by this billionaire who wants to build a golf course. If that sounds familiar, it's because it's rooted in the events that happened with the Trump golf courses and how they like ruined the local economy. So there is a lot of social commentary that takes place in this, and I liked its overall execution. There's like romantic elements, it explores grief, but then also just like the way that the economic ruling class is painted in this is really clever, and I enjoyed the overall banter. I don't think if you're like on the younger side, because I remember Kristen wasn't the biggest fan of it. It's good. It's fun. I liked it. It's different than anything I've read before. So it's a good fall read that I would recommend. Maybe end of summer, like Summerween, read The Haar. Now, if you don't know, I have been friends with Nathan at Schizophrenic Reads for a very long time, and since February he's been talking about this book by Naomi Klien called Doppelgänger, A Trip into the Mirror World. It lives up to the hype. It is a 5-star book. It explores so many topics, and it's a hybrid novel. Again, it has elements of memoir, but also her exploring her doppelganger, her exploring the doppelganger that she has always been associated with, which is Naomi Wolf, who is a huge reactionary. And I thought it was so interesting how she was able to tie into some of the stuff that she said, explored like the climate crisis, Palestine, conspiracy theories, and the internet. It's just, It's a really different nonfiction book. So if you're looking for something to kind of like mix up what you're reading, if you read a lot of academic work, I think this would be like a really fun book, and you'd have a lot of takeaways from it. Yeah, I think about it on a regular basis, if I'm going to be quite frank with you. This is one of those books I'm going to have to go and get a physical copy of because I want to annotate it, because there's just so much in here that I didn't know about in the world. Very good. Trust, if you are looking for another nonfiction content creator to follow and has good book recommendations, Nathan is the person to go to. Because I've read several books. This is just a Nathan Stan account. Hi. I read a classic in September as well, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Stevenson. I also really like this. I gave it a 5-star rating. The extent that I understood this story had only been told through secondhand accounts. I think there was an instance in Tom and Jerry, so I kind of knew the gist of what it was, but what I didn't know was how it is more of like a tool to discuss philosophy, to discuss like the moral good, the moral bad, like what makes it is just like a really interesting, thought-provoking classic, and it's so short in the way it is told. It's just very clever. I think this would be fun to do with a book club because I do think it's a timeless classic. Like there's a reason that this is a classic, and I don't always feel that way about some of the classics that I read, but this one really lives up to the fucking hype. If classics can be hyped. I survived capitalism, and all I got was a lousy t-shirt by Madeline Pendleton. This novel was so fun. It is, again, it's a hybrid where you have equal parts memoir, equal parts self-help, and then equal parts like history of California and some other like historical events. I think Madeline did a really great job to storytelling in general, talking about her life and all the things that she went through that helped her develop the political ideology that she has today, which she is a communist. I thought it was really, like, you can really see her voice in the writing and the style of it. It's done really well, and there also is some really good real world advice when it comes to getting out of debt and buying houses and whatnot that you can take home with you. So no matter what, if you go into it wanting to learn about Madeline Pendleton's life, you're gonna get that. If you wanted to go into it and learn about some like anti-capitalist history, you're going to get that. If you want to go into it and learn some of the stuff that she's talked about in her TikToks when it comes to how to get yourself into a more financially stable situation, you have that. Like, this is gonna hit the nail on the head for a lot of different people for different reasons, and I really appreciate that. And last on the list for September is Shrek by William Stake. I gave it a 4-star. Again, this is a children's novel I've never read. I ended up reading it because I did an episode with Evan and Pokey Preet. Evan is Left of the Projector, if you don't know. So there is an episode of that where we discussed the first and second movies, and basically talked about how Shrek was a anti-colonial force of nature and just some other like fun themes within the films and the franchise that we really enjoyed. But I wanted to read the original source material because I had never touched it before, and you know what? It's cute. There's a lot of crossovers between the film, but I like how they took their own spin on it. And Mike Myers really made Shrek and his ogreness come to life. So I would recommend, so read it with your kids. And if not, it's just fun. If you like Shrek, you should at least read it. Now, October, there's only 16 books, so hopefully this won't take too long to get through. We're barely at like the 30-minute mark. Thank the Lord. Milk Fed by Melissa Broder. I gave a 4-star rating. I think this book may not be for everyone, but it was certainly for me. I thought it was a really interesting novel because it follows your main character, who is an anti-Zionist Jewish woman who has mommy issues. She has an eating disorder, and she's kind of trying to come to terms with her gender and sexuality. So it's exploring a lot of these different contradictions, and the way it is executed is really brilliant. I was entranced by the way it was written. Some of the parts of it are like really uncomfortable in such a good way, and I just really like to see her character grow. and overcome a lot of these ideologies, and how like she rationalizes everything. It's just a really refreshing literary fiction novel that I would recommend, because I've read a few literary fiction novels, and this one, like the politics of it, I think is what hit the nail on the head for me. A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. I gave a 5-star rating. It is written in second perspective, so you're getting it through like letters, which is pretty on par with like Dracula novels. But the way that this book took me by surprise, because I was under the impression that it was a romance novel, and it's not. It's really not. It's as much of it's more like exploring. I would say that this novel is a more accurate depiction of what Dracula would actually be like, how much of a pretentious and exploitative individual, taking advantage of people and their weaknesses, and just using them and toying with them and not seeing them as humans because he has been around for so long. So he basically just goes around and collects people to entertain him, and he's very abusive. And it's just really, it's beautifully written, it's lyrical, and you genuinely, like, through the main character's perspective, you can kind of just see her struggling to rationalize the decisions that her intimate partner, that she refuses to name but we know is Dracula, why he does the things he does, and how it comes to an abrupt and tragic ending. It's beautifully done, and we reviewed this over on Literary Liberation as well. This is one of the books that we read for our Halloween series. It's beautiful. I think you should give it a go. I've heard that the Carmilla retelling is not very good, but this one, which I can attest to, this one was good. I enjoyed it. City Limits, Infrastructure, Inequality, and the Future of Highways by Megan Kimball. I ended up giving this a little bit less than a 4-star rating. I thought it was fine. It's a really good intro if you don't know anything about like Fordism and how detrimental like highways and freeways and the lack of public transit is for society. I liked how it discussed the climate crisis and just how having all of these like super highways and freeways is bad for not just the world but the people that live near them. I liked how there was a gentrification aspect that was brought up in this as well, and it talked briefly about the history of different highway projects and how they were used to like push Black and brown communities out of different areas. So if you don't know anything about any of this, pick this book up. But if you do know any of the stuff that I've talked about, like, I don't know that you're gonna gain a lot. So it's not bad, but it's kind of just up in the air. Like, if this is something you're just want to start getting into, it's like an intro book. Married to the Alien Cowboy by Urza Dax. This is part of the Cowboy Colony mail order bride series that Urza Dax just put out. I saw the picture of this on Kindle Unlimited, and the cover is just so darling and cute, and I read it and I was so pleasantly surprised by it, because one, I don't ever read Western novels. I'm not a cowgirl kind of a reader. I don't really care for that. So the fact that it was an alien romance, I thought was really nice. But yeah, if you like this type of thing, or if you're just like wanting to dabble and explore, it was cute. I liked it. I don't think everyone's gonna like it. And the same didn't go for the second one, which was called Wrangled by the Alien Rancher. I gave it a 4-star as well. Like, they're very close to each other. They're cute. The romance is nice. I like it a lot. I don't know what else I can say. The smut, the erotica, the romance, it's cutesy, it's fun. Like, I don't think you can go wrong with any of those if you're into just something like quick, head empty. It kind of reads like a Hallmark movie. Both of them are cute. There's supposed to be more coming out, which I'm very excited about. But it's a good time. Paris, the Memoir by Paris Hilton. I gave this a 3-star. Now, I would rate it higher because it is written really well, and the way it explores the troubled teen industry and paparazzi, like the detrimental nature of, or the problematic nature of paparazzi. I don't know how to word it. Like how exploitative paparazzi are and the origins of influencer culture. Jesus Christ. I thought that was really interesting. However, Paris Hilton is still part of the economic ruling class, so it's like, what can you really take away from these topics? I hope that people, maybe like liberal feminists, can read this and be like, oh wow, like I didn't know a lot of this stuff about Paris Hilton. I was under the impression that she was like a party girl and all of this stuff. So there was some good insight, but I mainly read it for the nostalgia, because I remember seeing her in the like TMZ like papers when you go to check out at the grocery store. But also I know it's a fairly popular memoir, so I try to stay up to date with some of the stuff that I think maybe people who are not super into politics might be reading, so I can apply a Marxist lens to them. But it's not a bad memoir to read by any means. I think it's really clever and fun, but she's still part of the economic ruling class and can kick rocks. I read the first 2 novels of the I don't even remember what the series is called. It has a really long, like, the Sea Fated Mates, Alien Tyrant, and Alien Enemy by Orthodox, because I finished the first 2 books, what I just talked about. This is basically like Ice Planet Barbarians, but set on the planet of Dune. That's the only way I can like find a way to describe it. Some of the descriptors for the alien people on this planet are, it took me a while. I had to look up fan art to figure out what exactly they look like, because they're described as being like deep purple, but then also having ankles like a kangaroo, and they have tails like a kangaroo. They have 3-toed feet, and then their eyes are solid black with like specks of stardust looking things that like expand and contract with their emotions. It's certainly different, but they also have 3 tongues, and I think that speaks very loudly to what you're gonna get in these. I think they're written a bit more entertaining than Ice Planet Barbarians, which I think the whole Ice Planet Barbarians series that I have read, they're very sweet, whereas there's a little bit more higher stakes. I read the first 2 installations of Dead Man Wonderland by Jinsi Kataoka. I think that's how you say it. This manga series I am probably going to end up doing a full deep dive on. Essentially it's like an underdog story, which I knew what it like is going to be like that. But it's kind of like it's a post-apocalyptic novel where there is a private prison like industrial complex where people get sent, and then they have to perform in order to earn their medication to keep them alive, because they have these things like collars around their neck that are poisoning them, so they have to like do and entertain people for money. So it's kind of a critique of the private prison industrial complex, and I really liked it. I don't know where it's going to end up going, so I can't for certain say it, but it is very critical of the government that is of the governing powers and the people that are working at the prisons. So I thought it was really interesting, because I haven't seen anything like that in any sort of anime or manga. It's really interesting. I'm waiting on the 3rd manga though from the library, so I can continue to read it and provide notes. It's very difficult to review manga because it's pretty quick. Like, you can finish a manga novel or volume in about an hour, so you get ideas of the story. So I think when I do end up giving like a full review of the series, like I think it's done, it's a finished series, I will have to record that, because I do think it's worth spending time on and exploring it. It kind of reminds me of like politically, how political it is of like Attack on Titan. So hopefully it keeps it up. I don't know how it's gonna end. Black Paradox by Junji Ito. I rated 4-star. This, I don't know. I think if you are somebody that reads a lot of his work, you should read it, because the premise of this is really weird. It's about a group of teens, trigger warning, who are trying to like Kermit sewer slide, and a lot of crazy stuff ends up happening, and one of the guys ends up throwing up this orb that's like a marble or bubble, and through it, it's like it's a power source, and they end up opening, like, I don't even know how to describe it. I think you should just read it if you're like somebody that reads it a lot. However, I don't think this is like the jumping off point for people who are like wanting to get into his work. I think you would be better off reading like Uzumaki. Don't watch the fucking show. Please don't do that. Or Shiver, or Ramina. I also really liked Censor. I think was a really good comprehensive story. It all kind of like flows together because some of his story collections are kind of all over the place, but this one was an experience. I wasn't completely sold on the ending of it. Slow Down, the Degrowth Manifesto by Howe Saito. I didn't write his last name on this. I'm so sorry. It is a 5-star read. Now, he does have some criticisms of China and the USSR in it, which I think are good faith. However, I know other people may take contention with what he says, so read it with a grain of salt. He's a Japanese Marxist, but this whole book is all about how to combat climate crisis as Marxists. Like, so this is the Marxist perspective. It's critiquing our society that is so hung up on like productivity and our ability to perform and overproduce things in society to the point where we are wasting resources and damaging the world that we live in. There's a lot in this. I do think a lot of it's vital, but I don't know if it's necessarily something I would recommend to people who are just getting into Marxist theory. I think you'd be better off reading the original source material. I did read in this that him and some other comrades are working on synthesizing some other Marxist text that has not been published before, and I'm very excited and looking forward to that whenever that does end up coming out. The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. I was in the mood for just a short story, and I saw, it wasn't Brandon Baker, I can't remember the username, somebody on TikTok was suggesting short horror novels to read before Halloween to get in like your monthly goal, and this was one of the ones that popped up. Shirley Jackson has also written The Haunting of Hill House and another book. I'll put it up on the screen. You probably have seen it before, recommended. This was such an interesting short story. I liked the ambiance that it built, and it left me wanting so much more, but also being happy that this was all that I got. I'd recommend, if you're looking for something short and you're trying to get to your goal for the end of the year, maybe check it out. Eternal Rotten Romance by C.M. Guidos. This book is essentially a realistic version of Warm Bodies, like the movie. It is really gross and disgusting. It's about a scientist who is trying to stop the zombie virus because it's set in a zombie apocalypse, and she is like on her last thread. This is the last time she's gonna test anything before she ends it all, because like, what's the purpose of living? All she has is her cat and she's miserable. Anyways, her serum ends up working and she is lonely. She's very lonely, and I will leave you with that. It's a short story. If you want to feel like disgusting, or you just want to read something you're just like, what the fuck, pick this up. I read one of the newer like book talk, I wouldn't call it a dark romance, but it's one of like the bigger like questionable contemporary romance series, which is The Ravenhood. The first book is Flock by Kate Stewart. I gave this book a little bit less than a 3-star. This is seriously one of the messiest novels that I have ever read. Like, the dynamics between these characters is so painful to watch. I physically cringed. I hated all of them, but I could not put it down. I kid you not, I ended up reading like almost the whole book in a day. It's so like 300 or 400 pages. It is that big of a mess. But here's the thing. Here's where it gets a little tricky, is that the politics of the Ravenhood are questionably revolutionary. And I probably won't be able to talk about the whole series until next month when I post, or maybe I'll post like a video talking about the whole series, but there is some little spin-offs that I don't know are relevant. If I can get more plot line, I will read them, but I have finished the whole trilogy, and I have a lot of thoughts. Last on the list is Creep, Accusations and Confessions by Miriam Gerba. This is a 5-star novel. This explores creeps. That's quite literally what it's about. When it says, like, it is the title, and it's a memoir, but also it's sociology and feminist theory, but the way it's done is so unnerving and disgusting, and it just leaves you, like, there's times where I just had to, like, stop what I was doing and put the book down. You just gotta put the book down, because there's just some things that she experienced that are things that, like, I think a lot of people who have been socialized by the patriarchy to behave in certain ways, right? You grow up being socialized as woman, and we've probably had a lot more of these similar experiences that Miriam talks about in this, that you just didn't think about. And it's done really well. I also liked how she talked. She talks about a lot of stuff. She talks about serial killers. She talks about her life, what it's like being, like, a Latina American. She talked about, like, her family members and, like, politicians in Mexico. There's just, if you haven't read anything or grew up around people, I don't know where I'm going. I'm kind of just, like, rambling at this point. Again, this is another one of those books that Nathan recommended, and he was right. He also recommended the Degrowth Manifesto, and again, he was right. So that's 3 for 3 in the last 2 months. I don't want to give away a lot with Creep, but this is what I want in a memoir. This is what, because it is, like, working class focused and centered, and the way it talks about feminism and just the lived experiences of, like, living under the patriarchy and being, like, a victim of white supremacy as somebody who is from Mexico or has Mexican family. She just does a really good job of exploring those topics, and it's written brilliantly. You cannot go wrong with it. I'm trying to think if that's all there is. I think that's all there is. These are all the books. I'm so sorry that this is so long, but I got really frustrated with my original recording, and I know that the quality of this is not good. I'm using a new recording platform, so if anyone has any suggestions on how to change the settings on OBS, let me know, because I don't know what I'm doing. And if this didn't record the audio, how to lose my marbles. If you want to keep up with me and what I am reading as I'm reading it, I have a story graph and a Goodreads. You can see how many pages in my statistics whenever you want. If you like this long form content, let me know. I know a lot of this is going to be rambling and full of filler words. I apologize. It is 8 p.m. on a Tuesday night, and I'm tired because I'm fucking old. Thank you for watching. If anyone has any book recommendations, I am always willing to take them. But yeah, thanks for watching, and check out my podcast, Literary Liberation, that I co-host with Kristen. If you want some of the reviews, I'll make sure to link it. And if you want the Shrek review with Evan at Left of the Projector, I will also link that in the comment section.